Welcome to Insights in Touch, the podcast where industry insight meets meaningful conversation. Hosted by Kristin Thorne, this series, presented by iFraud Foundation, explores the real issues facing the property and casualty insurance world. It's the pulse of an industry under pressure and the voices working to protect its future. Stay informed, stay connected, stay in touch. Now, here's your host, Kristin Thorne.
On this edition of the Insights in Touch podcast, we have the Commissioner of the Louisiana Department of Insurance, Tim Temple. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. Glad to be part of the program today.
So look, first I want to talk about, let's get right into it. Operation Sideswipe. This is a huge deal for the state of Louisiana, for New Orleans. It really culminated just recently. Two attorneys, Vanessa Mota and Jason Gillies, were convicted of essentially operating a 13-year-long scheme where they essentially paid people to eye 18-wheelers, slam into 18-wheelers, and then they would obviously do what they were doing, which is take the insurance money and try to litigate these things. I mean, this is 63 people in total accused in this fraud. Tell me about how the state of Louisiana is feeling about this, how your department is feeling.
Yeah, you said a word there. You said huge, how huge this is. And I don't think that's a good enough adjective to describe this. I mean, in addition to the 63 defendants that there are, I mean, there are hundreds of millions of insurance dollars, that were fraudulently, claimed during this process. And it isn't just a Louisiana problem. It is a national problem, but we're here to talk about Louisiana. Look, the Department of Insurance, we were proud to play a part. It was initially identified as a potential insurance fraud ring. And this started several years ago, actually before my 10 years as Commissioner of Insurance. My predecessor was part of that. But Department of Insurance, we worked with the state police. We worked with the Department of Justice here, the Attorney General's office, and then obviously those groups have been working with the feds to highlight exactly, just how big a problem this is. And I think this is just one example that's going on in Louisiana. My suspicion is there's probably others that we haven't even found yet.
Take me through the cooperation that it required for this type of investigation. I mean, this really touched every law enforcement agency.
Yeah, it did. And, a lot of times the initial report will come to the department. Someone will suspect insurance fraud, whether it's an insured or an insurance company. And I think last year we had like over 4,000 reports of suspected insurance fraud. Here at the department, we have a division, and that is their sole focus. And over the last 2 years since I've been commissioner, we've shifted more, away from, what I would call regulatory insurance, which is insurance agents, adjusters. We're looking, and obviously we still involved in those, but we're trying to find out what is driving loss cost in the state. And I think, and again, this was started before I was, but our department will focus. They take that initial report. They open an investigation, and then if they feel that there's enough information there to warrant conducting a further investigation, then we partner with the state police. They start to look at it from a criminal perspective, and then once the state police feel comfortable with the information they have, then it goes to the Attorney General's office and then from there. So it does take multi-agencies to identify and track down these bad actors. And the good news is that we have a good working relationship with both the state police and the division of Department of Justice here.
What would you like to say specifically about Vanessa Mota and Jason Gillies? I mean, they're sort of seen as the, some of the masterminds behind this thing. What was your reaction when you heard about the conviction?
Yeah, look, I'm glad that they were convicted, but I think it also shows that, these were two attorneys operating in kind of a gray area. Obviously, there was insurance, there was legal malpractice that they were committing. And they typically get to hide behind the State Bar Association and because that's where they're disciplined for, bad legal acts. So I'm glad that we were able to, be part of breaking the seal, if you will, on going after these bad attorneys. And look, it's not just the attorneys. I know, and I want to get into a little bit, some of the other actors who were medical providers. We heard witnesses say that they were part of this thing where they weren't injured, but yet somehow a doctor said that they were injured. There were people that also said that they had medical treatments, medical procedures on them. That's something else. So we need to get to that next stage of this during the investigation.
Yeah, tell me about that. Is that where you would like to see this sort of go?
Yeah, I would. It always it starts with the individual being part of this. To say that they want to be part of this scheme. But so it takes a lot of bad actors. It takes the individual. It takes the attorney that's willing to bring a fraudulent lawsuit litigation. It also takes the bad actor, the doctors, the medical providers, and again, I don't want to taint any one industry just by a few bad actors, but the fact that this investigation has focused on just the two attorneys and some of the slammers, the ones that coordinated that, there are a lot of bad actors in this. We need to make sure that we look at every single one of those because they all played a role in this. They all contributed to insurance companies paying more in losses that they shouldn't have, and ultimately driving up premiums for all of us.
Let's talk about that. I know you guys have estimated, you believe due to the scheme of Operation Sideswipe, there's $600 a family this ended up costing and increased insurance. Can you?
Yeah, I've seen that number on, and I certainly believe it. It could potentially be higher than that. I think at the end of the day, once we figure out exactly how broad a scheme this was, all of the insurance companies that were impacted by this, all of the claims that they paid on behalf of some of these bad claims, that once we're able to get a full accounting of that, then we'll be able to look and see exactly how big an economic impact this had. But it's not just on us as individual ratepayers; it's also on the businesses that are impacted by this. These were commercial vehicles, commercial trucking. In Louisiana, as in most states, all the goods that we consume on a daily basis are moved around on wheels. On commercial vehicles, whether it's an 18-wheeler or a flatbed truck or a box truck or something like that. And so when insurance loss go up, then premiums go up accordingly. And then we end up paying for that more through the price of consumer goods. So this isn't a victimless crime. We're all paying part of it.
Yeah, and I know you probably don't want to talk too much about the criminal aspect of this, but I do want viewers to know that there was a man who was killed in 2020, Cornelius Garrison, who they believe he was an FBI witness as part of this entire scheme, and Vanessa Moda's her fiance, was charged and pled guilty to killing this FBI witness. So this goes into how deep this fraud went. And I am not surprised. I mean, when you see about how much money and power is involved in these type of schemes, I feel horribly for Cornelius Garrison and his family. He was trying to do the right thing and lost, at least at that point, and lost his life because of it. And so we're still waiting for that to, more of those details to come out, as well as Vanessa Moda's fiance is going to now face charges for that. What else do you want people to know about, the level of this, or do you want to say anything about Cornelius Garrison? I don't know if you have any opinions on that.
Yeah, look, I mean, and you're right. I mean, he was a bad actor. I think he was trying to make the best deal he could and change the outcome of that for himself. But it should never be worth someone's life. But it does highlight the fact that, I mean, these are enormous sums of money that people are willing to kill over to try and hide their bad actions. And so, like I said, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, not just for Louisiana, but for the country. We've seen in other states where I think New York recently had in the last year a big ring was exposed there. But it also highlights the fact, this is kind of it's a high reward, low risk type of event, because insurance fraud doesn't get the resources that like other crimes, criminal investigations, murder, and things that we see, just the police forces focus on. And so, I would think it's a kind of a call to arms for the insurance industry, and also for regulators to start to allocate more resources towards, crimes like this.
And so where do you see things going next in Louisiana? We had these big convictions. Do you expect more conviction under Operation Sideswipe, or do you think you're now trying to move into the medical provider direction?
Yeah, I think there'll be more convictions, but in addition to that, though, like you said, I mean the medical provider side of it, we've seen two attorneys, obviously been convicted. There are a lot of other people that were involved in this, and it's my my hope, my wish that they continue to explore and investigate some of the other bad actors into this. No single person could have done this by themselves. It took a coordinated effort by a group of individuals to do this. And so I think there's a lot more bad actors out there. We need to identify them, and then we need to hold them accountable and bring them to justice.
How much does dealing with fraud factor into your day? Is it something that you have to deal with on a daily basis?
It's really not. I've got a deputy commissioner over fraud. He is in charge of, about a dozen individuals that's their day in, day out mission. Typically, what they'll do is they'll bring to me if they need authority to investigate further or if they need additional resources to do that. I try to stay out of the day to day, especially as they get into a lot of the details. There's a point where, I need to know as much as I need to know. And certainly I can find out whatever I want to, but I let them have the autonomy to run their division the way that they need to. So that way I'm not holding them back in any way, shape, or form. As I tell them, come to me when you need more. And they've been pretty successful. And over the last 2 years, I'll tell you, Kristen, we've actually started using artificial intelligence and some other tools like that, so that we're not looking at just a one-on-one basis for potential fraud. We're actually trying to triage large amounts of data to look and see if there's collusion taking place. Repetitive, whether it's a repetitive claimant, repetitive law firms being involved in fraudulent activities, repetitive medical providers being involved, in individuals. And so we're trying to look at it from a much broader expanse, if you will, and not just kind of like what's in front of us day in, day out, what's reported. We're trying to get ahead of a lot of that.
And I know what you mean about it can become very overwhelming, all of this stuff. So I'm glad to see you have a team there, which is really, really important. What would you like people to know as we close out here? Why these convictions are important, why what you are doing in your department is important and what it means for them?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, insurance fraud, it's not victimless. We all pay for it. I was recently talking to a large national, actually a global retail organization, and they shared with me that they pay an estimated $1 billion a day for fraud from stores, from retail theft, from all of these combined things. And this was obviously a very large entity, but that price gets put back into the product that you and I and everybody else pays for. So I think that's what I want people to be aware of. I've seen some numbers that say the kind of the next generation coming up kind of view insurance fraud differently than perhaps myself and others. That they think that because they paid a premium, if they file a claim for an event that really didn't happen, or maybe it's questionable, that it's okay because they feel like they've paid for it. That's not how insurance works. I mean, anytime somebody is getting something that they aren't owed, then we, through the rest of the ratepayers, are funding that. And I think that people need to be aware of that. When you hear the story of somebody that got in a wreck and they really didn't have any damage, but they were able to get a check just because of the inconvenience of it, you and I paid for that. And we need to be mindful of that, especially in today's environment now, where insurance affordability and availability is on everybody's talking points. We've got to do everything we can to drive down that excess cost, and in a lot of times, fraudulent cost, so that we can pay, what we should and not more than that.
Tim Temple, the Commissioner of the Louisiana Department of Insurance, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, I appreciate the time, and I look forward to next time as well.
Absolutely.